Tell us the story of the beginning of your faith transition. What happened? How did it happen?
So the impetus would have been you, love. So I have a memory of you coming to me, and we had put the kids to bed. It was later in the evening, and you sat me down in our bedroom. And I remember your voice was shaking. I remember your hand actually shaking when it took my hand. You kind of led me to sit down. And I had known the background that you were teaching seminary. I knew that you were doing extra reading. I could tell by your mood that something was up. But I remember you saying something to the effect of, you know, I have something to tell you. You know, I've been reading a lot, and amidst my reading, I just really feel like the church may not be what it claims to be. And I remember starting to cry. And
why were you crying?
Oh, I think, you know what it was like at that moment? It was like, I'm going to bring up the tower image. It was like my life, the church had given me these building blocks of different values. So like, you know, obedience or service, and it could even be things like attending church on Sunday, whatever. And all through my life, they gave me the blocks and they told me sort of where to put it, kind of. And it slowly made this structure that was my life, you know? And I added blocks too. I think I was proactive in trying to you know, as I found things, I integrated those in there too. But I really feel like in that moment, the tower fell. It just fell.
And how did that make you feel?
In an instant. And I think I immediately grew really afraid. I think I immediately was in fight or flight. But I also was looking at you, someone I love, someone I trust, someone who I know is really devoted to the things that he loves. And so it was this mixture of like extreme loss and also really wanting to be present to what you were telling me and to offer companionship and be there for you. And so I remember you going into rough, I remember really roughly that you talked about Joseph Smith a little bit. I think you talked about how many women he was married to, how young, some of the circumstances around that. A lot of the D&C, some of the D&C sort of background things you would have learned looking into the D&C. And I remember at that moment also feeling this resonance. And that was really confusing. But it made me in that moment say, you know, what does this mean? Do you know what this means? Like, what does this mean for us? What do you want to do? And what should I read? What can I, like, if I want to learn too, what should I read? And at that point you said, Fawn Brodie, No Man Knows My History. And I did. I read it.
And
again, I think
Do you remember any impressions from the book? Did it seem anti-Mormon? Did it seem untrue? Did it seem scandalous? Or
No, it didn't seem scandalous to me. It read like historic. It read like something historical. And a lot of those things, it was strangely affirming to some of the things that I had felt as I read, like, oh, yes, there it is, and yes, there. And so it was strange that in the moment you were telling me something new and something that I actually had that voice that I had silenced that I didn't really know, it spoke up in that moment.
What did it say?
For me too. And I suspected that the church wasn't true.
What was that like to feel, oh my gosh, this thing I had spent my whole life being committed to might not be true? What did that feel like?
So I think there was probably a sense of betrayal for a moment. I think I tend to go inward though. I tend to go to like, I'm so naive, like, oh, see, all those things I thought all along, I could go back and remember the things I had difficulty with, and just feeling like, how naive was I? But even more than that, I have to tell you, this was not, in this moment, it didn't stay with me very long, because what I felt like happened was that this boat that was our family and our life and our marriage began to really become unstable. And I feel like at that point, my major intention and objective was, how do I stabilize the boat? And so Seattle for me was about stabilizing the boat. And I didn't really begin the journey of really transitioning from myself until we moved to Utah shortly after.
So several years at least, a few years.
To me, it felt like a year-ish.
I think my faith crisis was 2001-ish, and we left in 2004.
Okay.
Yeah. A lot of spouses, when the believing spouse hears the non-believing spouse say they don't believe anymore, it makes them retrench and go the other way and become more committed to the church, almost to hold on to the church with a really tighter grasp, because they see their non-believing spouse falling away and they feel like they have to go the other way. Did you what? And if not that, they often feel anger or resentment or fear directed at the non-believer, to the extent that it really just drives this huge wedge in the relationship, where the non-believer becomes a disappointment and kind of a broken, fallen person that needs to be saved. What kept you, number one, from retrenching in the church and seeing me as a bad guy? That's part one of the question. And what was it that allowed you so quickly to actually be willing to learn and to consider the things I had said versus plug your ears and close your eyes and run the other direction?
So, okay, well, the first part of the question, I feel like I was looking at someone I love suffering. You were suffering. And you had been suffering. And so I just didn't want to leave you.
What do you mean by leave me?
I didn't want to leave you alone in that. I wanted to at least be able to hold it for a bit. And I trusted you. Your behavior and your life attested to the type of human you were, and that meant something to me in this process. So at that time, all I saw was a human that I loved suffering, and it made me want to be a witness and share what I could, so you didn't have to be alone in it. And I was very imperfect at doing that. So I do feel like there were times you were very sad in Seattle. And I do feel like there was an obsessive quality to the reading and the researching at that point. And then the more you would read and the more you would research, the more depressed and sad and conflicted you became. And so that was a process. There were moments where I said to you, you have to slow down. You have to come up for air. Like, you have a family. here around you that loves you. And it's like you don't even see us. We had those moments where, and I do believe I had moments too where I judged you, where I thought, you brought this discomfort, you brought this instability to us. You know, what now? Like, let's regain stability. How do we do that? Where are we going? But the main thing that kept me from living there, from like pitching a tent in this place that would allow judgment and discord and this divide between us, was that I really valued our family life. And I knew that if that misdirected, our family could be divided, that you could be seen as inactive or the one that, you know, was transgressing, and I could be the good one and the faithful one and our kids. And then I thought, really, you know, that would be the worst ever. That what I wanted most was this idea that our family was going to stick together, that we stood by each other, and that we would love each other. And that's where that conditional love paradigm began to shift.
What do you mean? From what to what?
From us, the sameness, us having to fall in line, to what if he's different? What if now we're different? What if things he wants to do now with regard to the church, like talk to the bishop, is different than something I want to do now? Can we love then? Is our love big enough to hold those types of differences? And it was right then we were beginning a new path and a new love, a new paradigm.
And then what made you willing to read No Man Knows My History, a book that many feared? What made you willing to go read and learn versus just say, I don't want to know? You know, I don't want to know.
I think it was because I had that resonance. I think I heard a piece of me came alive, and I wanted to know. I wanted to read. I wanted to say, you know what, there's part of this that's been part of my story all along, where I've had difficulty. I should at least look at it for myself.
And as you were doing that, did you get dark feelings of like, this is evil? What feelings did you get as you began studying?
I think I felt whole. I felt finally all these different pieces that kind of lived and were disconnected in me or shelved, all were able to come together, and it made sense. And it was hard, it was disappointing, and it was a death of a life and a way of viewing the world and myself, for sure. But it also was tremendously relieving.
In what way?
Because the dissonance, there was no dissonance then. And it allowed me to see that my voice, or those little inclinations that I had had all along, actually had a place and made sense. And all of the things that sort of didn't make sense, there was a place for them now that made sense.